Hello, my name is Barry Kimball, and I work for Autodesk, and this is the first video in a series of Class A training tutorials. This is a simple tutorial of my UI setup and some of the reasons that I like to use some of the functions that we'll be discussing. So what we're looking at here is just a default modeling Alias 2016 default interface. I've made no changes. All I've done is open a file. So the first step that I would do is to come in and adjust my draw style so that I have surface width double, which is default, but X's for its CV display, O's for the CV display for curves, and I like to have my symmetrical side to be solid. Pretty simple. Next, Windows Display Hardware Shade. I'm just going to toggle the hardware shade on. I like to have my quality at least to 0.005. And I like to use the warm-cold lighting light source scenario, just as a general way to look at surfaces. Next, I'll set my anti-aliasing for wireframe display and up the single line width and the double line width to 1 and 2. It's kind of a nice view, and when you have the anti-aliasing turned on, I think you can get a pretty nice view of the shape of these curves and the kind of tension that they have. Okay. The next thing I like to have on is my layer bar. So often people use the object display lister, and that's fine. I've used this for years, so it's what I'm used to. The next thing I need to do is turn on the menus, long menus, so we can have access to a couple more features. Preferences, menus, or interface marking menus, and right mouse button will allow me to replace this shelf set with a set that you'll be provided with. So marking menus, this is my personal set. So that set of marking menus has picking tools or selection tools, left mouse button, middle mouse button is some transformation and information tools, and right mouse button is some visibility tools. Okay, so we can shut that off. Under preferences, general preferences, I like to make a couple of just brief changes. Under viewing, I like my Alt-Shift action to be azimuth elevation, and I turn off allow axis constrained tumble. Next, under modeling windows, I like to turn the gradient back style off. So this goes from gray now kind of down. I just like to turn that off. Sometimes if it's for visualization purposes, I'll do it, but when I'm modeling, it's just not something I choose to have on. So that goes through and sets some of those preferences up right there. Next would be the palette orientation. So I like to have my palette right here. I like to have it horizontal like this versus vertical. So what I do is I make it quite a thin strip, and I'll place it right here on my layer bar and title bar. But on my right mouse button, I have access to turn that palette on and off. So sometimes when I want to turn that thing on, right, I can get functions from there. And then sometimes when I want to use these functions, I can quickly have access to that. So it's quite a difference, all features here versus just my layer bar and then access to my modeling control or turning the model on and off, toggling the grid and things like that. Next, my control panel. So I'm just going to go under the control panel and say replace. And again, there's a provided one for the control panel that we'll access here. And this is my control panel. So I'm just going to shrink these a little bit and show you what I've got in here. So under curves, and I tend to use the right mouse button to look at my menus. So I have ways to create degree 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 edit point curves, curves on surface, do some modifications. Then under surfacing, I've got some tools, editing, evaluation tools, construction tools, and then some primitive tools. So those are just my menus for there. So the next thing I would like to talk about is the performance options. So if we turn off the car and I turn on my next setting that I'd like to discuss, which is the performance options, if we go into our Move CV tools and we pick a CV here, and I just tell it I want to move up and down, I can move that CV, but I don't see the result over here until I'm finished. So if an easier way to illustrate that might be to have my control vertices on. And now if we go into Move CV here, I'm going to turn this mouse sensitivity down. As I move this up, I see no modification, and down until I let go. Then I see what happens to this surface. So the next UI thing I would like to set is my performance options for construction history to update while I'm transforming things. So now as I move this up and down, I get to see dynamic results on my child surface. So next, let's talk about just a few plugins that I like to use. So I'm going to shut off the grids for right now and go to the Utilities Plugin Manager. So under here, I'll expand this so we can see some of the plugins that are available. I like to use the best fit plane, and I'll explain each of these when I'm done turning them on. So I'm just going to tell it to load that plugin and then automatically load it every time I start the software. So next I'm going to do extract trim regions, turn global curve intersect off. I don't use that so much, but global surface intersect on, view move object, erase paper, and save layers under data transfer. Those are all the ones I believe that I like. Okay, so the first one was the best fit plane. So I'm going to switch to ortho mode, which I do almost all of my modeling in the orthographic mode. I do my evaluation in perspective. So I would like to make a piece of geometry, a plane, that represents this feature. Okay, so that kind of theoretical right there. So to do that, I'm going to create a degree 1 curve, a degree 1 curve, edit point curve, and I'm going to turn my snapping to 2. This is another preset that I make. This allows me to pick the center point of a curve. And I'm going to start here and just pick center, center, center. I know this probably goes a little bit further, but that's okay. Center. And you see here how it's allowing me to pick a midpoint because I put 2 in there. Okay, and now I've constructed a curve right there. Okay, so now we could pick that curve and open our palette and go to construction, create a best fit plane. And it creates a best fit plane right there based on the points on that curve. Okay. Now with my control panel, my reference data, I could say set a plane, so it moves my plane to there. I'm going to show the grid. Under objects, I'm going to create a planar surface. Okay. I'm going to do a little scaling on that. Maybe rotate it just a touch. Do a scale that way. So we can get an idea of what that plane looks like and how it cuts through that geometry. So once I have that done, I'm going to toggle my grid. And now we can make a judgment and see how planar that actually is. So if we zoom in here and I use some of my azimuth and elevation controls, see I can rotate this plane, get it square to grid, and then I can roll it this way, and I can judge if those points all sit on that plane. And you can see that's an average of those points, right? This point's above, on, below, on, right? And that gives me an idea of what the shape of that fillet is. And you can see right there, that fillet tends to move around and follow off that plane. that's something you want to be able to analyze, and that I'll teach you how to do as we move forward. Okay, so that's best fit plane. Next, let's do extract a trim region. So here we have a case where we have a surface that's been trim divided to two areas, or trimmed to two areas, I'm sorry, not trim divided. And now I'd like this to be two different surfaces. So under our palette, surface edit, trim, extract trim regions, we could pick this and say go, and now we have two distinctly different surfaces. So that's something I like to use. Next is the erase paper tool. So if we look at an interior here, and I'm going to turn on shading, okay, I've got kind of a 3D model of this exterior from the Vulcan and a sketch of an interior. But what's hard for me is I can't quite see this hood horizon line and how it interfaces with this geometry. And in this view, right, now this is where I might go if I'm doing 3D modeling like this. I might go to the perspective window, right, and turn my perspective on. But I'd like to be able to see through this sketch onto the geometry. So that tool is called Erase Paper. So to use the Erase Paper tool, under Paint, you just need to make a marker, so any kind of marker, and then use your eyedropper or pipette and select the color. Once you've selected the color, you can go to Paint, Edit, and Erase Paper. And now it's erased everything that's not part of the drawing. So now when we're in this view, we can see how the line geometry interfaces with our sketch. Okay, because we can see through it now. So now you can get a little better idea rather than being totally shaded by that 2D drawing. Okay. The last thing, well, maybe not last, layers, save layers. This allows me to export every one of these layers as a certain file type. So we can do wire, IGES, CATIA, EDF files, and we can export these as all those formats rather than having to pick the geometry and do an export active for each one. Okay. Global Surface Intersect is installed under Surface Edit, Intersect, or Create Curve on Surface, I'm sorry, and Mutually Intersecting Surfaces. So you just pick like an egg crate of surfaces, and it will select all of them. You don't have to pick one side and another. It will just find all the intersections that are possible. Okay. So I believe that's most of the UI setup that I have. Maybe one last thing is the locators. So we have a piece of geometry here, and it's got a gap in between its surfaces. So under locators, or evaluate continuity, surface continuity, we can turn locators on. If we look at for G0 positional, and I turn on show max labels and show cone. Okay, currently when I do a deviation check between these boundaries, I get this. It's yellow because it's no good, but I really can't see where the issue is. So if I delete that and I use this new locator setting, now with the middle mouse button I can increase the number of samples, and with the left mouse button I can increase the graphical representation of the deviation. Okay, so I find that a lot better than just a simple line. When it's green, you can still see the sample points, and also in my marking menu, if we go to middle mouse button and move locator, you can right mouse button on this and see what the deviation is at each one of these little spots. Okay, so you can get extra information out of that. Okay, so the last thing I would say we need to do here is save our preferences. So preferences, user preferences, and save. And all preferences are saved, and we're ready to start modeling. So I'll talk to you in the next video.